Okay. I'm super excited for today's session. Let's get it started. Okay. Welcome to week 2, folks. This is a focus on what makes a successful proposal. So here's our exciting lineup for today, just so folks know what to expect in the next 2 hours. We're just going to have a quick recap of last week's session. I think we have a couple of new folks in the room who couldn't join us last week. And then we're going to spend about an hour in a conversation with our panelists today. So we have 4 amazing panelists who are going to answer a lot of questions for us. And then we're going to take a break. So get coffee, get water, do what you need to do. And then we're going to come back for a Q&A session with the panelists. And then to wrap it all up, we're going to close up maybe the last 10 minutes on next steps and an assignment for this week. Okay? Okay. Just a brief recap from last week. We did have Robin Sylvester join us, who's back this week, and she gave us a really thorough overview of the types of grants you can find in public health and where to find them. So if folks missed that session or they want to go back through those resources, the slides and recording are now available on the Google site. So go back and check it out. We also did ask folks to submit the pre-survey. I think maybe there are a handful of folks who haven't done it, but if you did, thank you. And if you haven't, you still have until this Friday. And so all of the information on there has been super helpful so far. And I'll touch back on the end about how we're using those pre-survey responses to craft this workshop for all of us here. So your input and your feedback on that survey has been super important. Okay. And then with that, I think we're going to jump into the content for today.
I'm going to just interrupt really quickly. Eugenia asked, are we submitting them weekly or once? I'm assuming that's for the evaluation.
For the evaluation, you're just doing the pre-survey once. If this is about assignments, you're submitting them almost every week. Okay. Eugenia said, okay, so I think the question was answered. Thanks, Goody, for jumping in with questions. Okay, so I don't see any other questions, which means I'm going to pull us into the panelists or the panel conversation for today, which is going to be moderated by Dr. Alexis Grant, and we're going to have 4 excellent panelists here. We're going to have them introduce themselves and then answer our questions that we have today. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Grant, who's going to moderate the panel, and we can meet her and all the panelists for today.
Thanks, Maggie. My Wi-Fi has been really wonky and I'm on my hotspot now, so I hope to be connected the whole time. But if I drop off unexpectedly, that's what happened, and Maggie will take over. So before we get started with our questions, I just wanted to give the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. We have Sarah O'Brien, Mark Atkins, Robin, who all of you met already, and Amy Einstein. So Sarah, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sarah O'Brien. I'm Director of the Office of Research Development, which sits in the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research at UIC. My background is ecosystem ecology, so I spent about 15 years researching the role of soil in climate change. I did a PhD here at UIC and then worked at Argonne National Lab doing climate research. And then for a little while I was at UChicago. I moved into administration, working in research development, and then when the opportunity came to move back to UIC, I snagged it. So research development is sort of like pre-proposal development in some ways. I do a lot of work helping people find funding to apply to, helping them get the right teams together, and then sometimes also helping with the proposal itself. So I've written grants of my own, and I've helped other people write grants too.
Thanks for that introduction. Mark, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, let me just unmute there. There we go. Unmute myself. There we go. Yeah, hi, Mark Atkins. I am a professor here at UIC in the Department of Psychiatry. I direct the clinical engagement and collaboration core for our Center for Clinical Translational Science, known as the CCTS. I'm just outgoing director of the Institute for Juvenile Research, and I'm a child mental health services researcher, clinical psychologist by training. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, but most of my work is in communities and working with social service agencies and promoting innovative and new ways of delivering mental health services to kids and families.
That's succinct summary of all the different places you're sitting in. Robin, can you introduce yourself, particularly for those who weren't here last week?
Sure. So I'm Robin Sylvester. I'm the Director of Research Services for the School of Public Health. I assist our faculty and students here with putting together grant proposals, mainly for federal funding. And it's nice to be here again and to be able to talk with some other folks about grants. So that's all I have.
And great, thank you. And last up is Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Eisenstein. I'm a senior program officer at a local foundation here in Chicago called RRF Foundation for Aging, formerly the Retirement Research Foundation. And we focus on a variety of grants that I'll tell you a little bit more in the question or in the discussion, variety of different types of grants. My background's in gerontology. I have my master's degree in gerontology, and I got my PhD from UIC in the School of Public Health. And then I've spent time doing research both in academia. I was did full-time research at Northwestern in the Feinberg School of Medicine, Institute for Public Health and Medicine, and Department of Medical Social Sciences and Preventive Medicine. And then also transitioned and was director of research at a community-based organization here in Chicago for a number of years. So I've had the experience of doing research both from academia as well as from the community itself. So excited to be here today and have time to talk with you.
Amazing, thank you. And that kind of brings me to my first question, which is open to all of you. I was wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about the kinds of proposals that you review, whether those are grants or contract-based proposals, and how those proposals are advertised and the process for organizations to apply. So I'll start with Sarah.
Okay, I just switched my audio around. I hope can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
Great. So I mostly focus on federal funding opportunities. Occasionally, I get a little bit involved with foundation opportunities. So there's that. Usually it's grants, but it could be cooperative agreements, which are like a contract, and probably Robin can speak to that a little better than I can. Whereas the contract, I think is more for like service providing kind of stuff, which I think probably is what many of you are interested in. I tend to be more involved when it's research. So I'm not sure if that's a good answer to that question.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Mark, can I kick it over to you?
Sure. Yeah. So I've reviewed for a lot of different groups, the NIH principally, but I've also been on. I'm on a standing committee for a foundation, the William T. Grant Foundation, based out of New York, funds a lot of children's work, and I've reviewed for Robert Wood Johnson and those kinds of places. But I've also reviewed for the City of Chicago, the Illinois State Board of Ed, the Department of Mental Health. So I've seen a number of these proposals, and I'd like to share with you kind of some of the ways I see the difference in the way it goes. And the one thing I'd add about grants and contracts is that, as Sarah said, research is often a distinction, but sometimes it's actually more about a contract as a specific request to do something, whereas a grant is usually more open-ended to respond in the way that you think best. So we can chat a little bit about that as we get going here.
Yes, absolutely. Robin, would you like to share a little bit about what kind of proposals you review?
Yeah, sure. So I don't review proposals in the sense of making a decision about funding, but I do see a lot of proposals that come through my office at the School of Public Health. And in my role today, I'm kind of wearing the hat of the person that helps folks incorporate subawards or subcontracts into these larger grant proposals that we're submitting. So, we submit through my office in particular about, 50 or 60 grant proposals per year. And I would say that a large number of those do have subawards on them. And sometimes those subawards are to another academic institution, and sometimes they include a community partner or both. When we include a community partner, typically the lead researcher or project director on the grant will reach out to the community-based organization and invite them to participate. And that organization usually represents or serves a population that is critical to the project, or their area of focus is related to our topic area. So let's say the project is related to environmental health justice and your organization is focused on that, then that might be why somebody in the School of Public Health would reach out to you and say, hey, we're going to apply to this, National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences grant, and we really want to get you involved in this proposal in a key and critical way. And so usually that's a one-on-one kind of like reach out to the organization. But I would say that researchers are always looking for suggestions on organizations to work with on these proposals. And the Collaboratory has kind of made some efforts. So the Collaboratory for Health Justice in the School of Public Health has made some efforts in that area of, trying to find a way that we can identify potential partners. But we do recognize that, even with some kind of directory or something like that, there will still always be this kind of individual relationship building that needs to happen. But I would say that that's how you get involved in some of these applications as a subaward or subcontract.
Looks like we might have lost Dr. Grant, so I'm just going to jump
here
in.
Still.
Oh, good.
But yes, it's your turn. Go ahead.
So here at RRF, we focus on grants. I've also reviewed for the PCORI, or the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, where they focus on contracts. So I've had some experience kind of with those two different types. What we do at RRF is we're really focused in your goals and objectives. So the benefit of having a grant and not a contract defining every specific term is that if you're going down a path that's not working, there's flexibility to change some of your methods and what you wrote up in your proposal in order to continue to meet your goals and objectives of where you're trying to go. The other thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of types of grants, so we actually focus on 4 different types of funding. So we fund research, we fund advocacy, we fund direct service, and we also fund professional training and education. We see a lot of community academic partnerships, certainly in our research proposals, but also a lot of times in direct service where communities it's the other way around, where the communities are reaching out to researchers because they want to think ahead and do some evaluation with their grant. They want to understand what's going on with the project. They want to implement some sort of quality improvement, or really look at the implementation process and understand how to implement the project most effectively. So that's kind of a little bit of the types that we're seeing.
I think we did lose her this time. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to join and moderate the panel. Thanks folks for your patience. If I can move us to the next question, this one is for Dr. Eisenstein and Dr. O'Brien. Could you talk generally about the kind of criteria you use to evaluate a proposal when it lands on your desk?
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in. This is a really tricky question, and full transparency, we did receive the questions in advance, so I had a little bit of time to think through this, and this is tricky because, like I said, we've got 4 different types of grants that we give, and we use kind of different ideas. We don't have a scoring mechanism here at RRF because we are comparing apples to oranges in so many cases. Overall, we're looking at impact. We're looking at how these programs, how these organizations are going to impact either the organization themselves, if it's maybe capacity building. I didn't mention that, that's another type of grant we give, if it's going to really impact the organization in order to excel them in being able to obtain their own mission. So we're looking at impact internally, or we're looking at impact to the field. So some of the things that we consider, because then the next question is, well, how do you measure impact? What's impact? So I want to just mention some of the things that we consider in impact. We look at who's the proposal coming from? Is this the right organization at the right time? So have you had experience here? Do you have prior history, prior success in this area? Or if this is a new area for you, is it because there's no one else working in this space? Is there kind of stated need for this work? Are the right partners involved? Do you know the other players who are doing work in this field? And are you kind of understanding and recognizing where you fit into the current environment here? Is this work duplicative? Is it needed? Kind of some of the questions that we always look at are, is it interesting? We get a lot of proposals that, okay, great, this, what's the interest here? Where does this take us? What's the next step? What's the questions that this is answering to further the field? And what's the next step? Is it innovative? And is it significant? Is it going to have meaning in the field?
I think for me, so I didn't say before that I have been a panel reviewer for federal proposals to Department of Energy, NASA, NSF. So from that perspective, but also this perspective of helping people prepare proposals to submit to those sponsors, the thing that matters, I think, most is, are you responding to the call? Like, are you following the rules of what they're asking for? And that can be the rules about, page limits and margins and stuff like that. But like, are you hitting the key things that they say that they want to fund with this program? And with federal grants, always there is a purpose of the program, all the things that you need to write about, and then almost always there is review criteria for this program, and it's going to tell you what they're looking for. Those same things, those same words go to reviewers. So the reviewers are going to be asked the same things, like on a scale of, fair to, excellent, or 1 to 5 or 1 to 9, whatever it is, does the mentoring plan meet these stated goals? Does this meet these stated goals? Does, is the, if there's a hypothesis, is the hypothesis written, and is it addressed appropriately with the research plan that they've proposed? So like they're telling you exactly what they want you to say. Sorry. So I think that's the thing. And then that why me, why now? So I think that's like the number one point to make with any proposal. Why here, why now? Why is this the right time? Like, if, golly, this is an amazing opportunity, and if they don't fund your project right now, they are going to miss it. And this amazing thing is not going to get to happen because they didn't fund your proposal. That's, I think, the biggest sort of framework that I like to use for proposals.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks, Maggie, for hopping in as my connection continues to be dysfunctional. So I think we're on to our third question, and I'll kick this one to Mark first. Before writing the proposal, what steps do organizations need to take? Like, what kind of documents do they need to have at hand? What resources do they review in preparation? What's that process look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this will of course vary a good deal, but I'm gonna pivot that to a couple of things I've been thinking about wanting to say to you all. One of them is show me, don't tell me, and this could help you set up your data. So mentoring is extremely important to our organization. It's a really key value that we hold. That's lovely. I mean, that's really nice and aspirational, but prove it. So if there's some way that you can back up some of these aspirations, you're going to have a much more successful proposal. All right. The other thing I want to share, and this is somewhat, I'm sorry, this probably isn't directly related to this question, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot and I've been telling people a lot, is a phrase that a colleague gave me, which is you want to put things on top of the rug, not under the rug. So you don't want to bury anything in a grant. If you've got a weakness, which we all do, all of us personally, as well as our agencies and so on, and you're trying to respond to this, and you think you can cover it up, you're probably going to fail. And the reason I say that is when that's discovered during review, when somebody says, hey, by the way, they didn't say anything about this, or have you noticed this? No, it's almost as if you can almost, you have this house of cards and you just see the thing go. But the antidote to that is to be open and clear. And the way I like to say this is talking to your reviewers, telling your reviewers what you're thinking, being kind to your reviewers. In terms of getting back to the question, sorry, in terms of setting this up, as you're thinking about your proposal and you're thinking about why you're the right group for this, if you can pull your data and perhaps administrative data or some historical data, perhaps you want to arrange letters of recommendation or letters of support from allies. These are the kinds of things you don't want to do last minute. The more you can do ahead, the better. I'll stop there. I'm sure there's more, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. I want to kick it over to Sarah if you have anything to add of what organizations need before writing the proposal.
I think you need to, take a good look to see if this is a good fit and if it's something that you can actually manage, right? If you're a really small organization and you're applying for $10 million, like you don't even want that $10 million. You don't want to have to do all the reporting and stuff. So you want to get apply for things that are commensurate with your capacity and capabilities. And of course you want to grow, you want to be aspirational, but so I think that's one thing. And then making sure you have all the partners in place that you need. And I can say a whole bunch more about putting together teams for projects and ways to do that well and pitfalls and stuff. But do you have the right players? Do you have the capacity to do the thing that you're trying to do?
Yeah, thank you. Do any other panelists have anything to add to that question before we
respond? Can I respond to the question that was
Yeah, absolutely.
directed to me? Thanks. Yeah, a really good question, which is how do you, using the example of mentoring, what would be an example of some data that you can pull? So the way I think about this, and mentoring's a complicated one, but it's not impossible. If I'm saying that mentoring is extremely important to our organization, what are we doing in our organization to show that? For instance, that we monitor this, that we have supervision, that we go over it, that we actually work with our staff on how to mentor. We've done workshops on that. That could be helpful. The other thing is we talk to our, perhaps whoever they're mentoring, the trainees, the students, we get feedback from them and we give that feedback to anything like that would show that you've made a commitment to this over and above what some other agencies might do. Now, let's say you haven't done that. Let's say you haven't done any of that, okay? But mentoring is important to you. Don't hide it, right? Then say, mentoring is something that's integral to our organization. We've been doing it for years, and one of the ways that we keep track of it is through our team meetings, and we discuss it and so on. That's not quite as strong, right? But that's okay. That's what you're doing. Don't pretend you're doing something you're not. It's not going to work. It's going to show through. So you just lay it out the way it is. Point is that the more you can back up, the better. Not that you can back up everything, and you shouldn't try, but the more you can back up, better. Last thing I'll say is maybe this grant is going to give you that opportunity to set up that feedback system that you've always wanted to do, and that's what you say. Mentoring is very important. One of the things that we're excited about with this grant is we want to put in place this system to monitor, right? And so that would be another way you can go.
So but before we move on, I'll jump in for this question as well, if that's okay, Alexis.
Yeah.
So I think part of the question was also like, what can you do in advance, or what can you prepare in advance to apply for grants? And like I said, we apply for a lot of grants. So just some things that came to mind as the other panelists were speaking. I think part of what they were talking about in responsiveness are things that you can actually prepare in advance. So a list of your accomplishments as an organization. If you could write that up as, a page or a paragraph, then you can pull from that for future proposals. Biographical sketches or brief bios of your key personnel who are going to be leading these proposals. Having those on hand will make it a lot easier for you to put together proposals in short time period. A description of your resources, environment, facilities, is something that as if you are to be a sub-award on one of our federal grants that we'll be asking you for, but it can also, this is something we keep on hand. I find it very useful for even as the lead applicant, you'll need that as well. And then a description of your capacity to manage grants. So, just talking about, have you managed grants before? If so, what is the dollar value of those kinds of things? I see that a lot in the foundation applications, is that they're usually asking for a paragraph on that capacity.
That's a really great point. And I want to take that as an example of, let's say you don't have that. Let's say this is your first time in. Don't fake it, right? That's not going to work. But maybe what you do is you set up a relationship with an agency that has done that. Or maybe you bring on a consultant to help you with that. So I just want to play off that to say, not everybody's going to be able to do it, but it's a great point. If you can show a track record, obviously that's going to go a long way too. On the other hand, some agencies, particularly foundations, like to get people started. They like to get groups going. So don't be shy about that. Don't think that you can't compete because you haven't done it before. But anyway, partnering and getting feedback from colleagues. Sometimes people come to us. We work with community agencies. They might come to us and ask us to help them out with that and put us on as a consultant so that people feel that, okay, they've got some folks with some grant expertise, that kind of stuff.
I also wanted to tack on from one thing I want to say is all foundations, everywhere you apply to a grant to, if you apply to 10 different places, they're going to ask for 10 different things. So as was stated earlier, be sure to read those instructions. The very first thing you do, read the instructions, ask the requirements, because some of the things that they will ask you to attach might take some extra time. So for example, we ask for a financial audit. That's something that you want to just get started, make sure you have available CVs, resumes. That was brought up. We need authorized signatures. We need CEO and trustee signatures for organizations, list of your current board members. So just, and also 501c3 status, kind of the IRS letter stating your status, all of that stuff you could prepare, have together in advance. The other thing that I wanted to say with letters of support and letters of commitment, certainly begin working on those early. And don't make those templated. We see a lot of times organizations will submit letters of support that clearly was written by the applicant without much thought and input. Our trustees, our staff read all of those letters to see, do these organizations who are agreeing to partner really know what they're getting into? Are they really on board? Are they really supporting this work or not? So don't send a templated letter. Take some time to recognize what the letter is representing to the foundation or the organization you're applying to.
That's a great tip. Thank you. And that brings me to my next question. What characteristics make a proposal stand out, in particular for organizations? So it sounds like one of those things is unique letters of support. Robin, do you have other tips you want to start with?
So I think that, some of these were kind of addressed by the panelists before about impact, is a big one. From the perspective of a subcontract, some of the things that we're looking for is, has the organization or the lead team member done similar or related work before? Will the organization have the capacity to carry out the scope of work? Or And also, you know, on the subcontract front, like, is the organization responsive and willing to work with the lead applicant, which in our case is the School of Public Health, in order to develop the proposal, get the grant in, and then, you know, complete the work later on. So from that subcontract perspective, that's kind of what we're looking for, you know, an organization that stands out in a proposal.
Hey, Robin, can I ask you something about that? Because that's a great point. And I'm playing off this idea that not everybody's going to be able to do it. But let's say that I'm an organization that's providing services to a very unique population. And we don't have a track record of doing this. But what we're able to say is nobody's doing, you know, this is a population that needs this. And so we partner with someone that would play okay too, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So that's a really great comment. And thinking back to, so we talked about kind of like what are reviewers looking for in a grant. So in a lot of research grants, especially NIH research grants, one of the criteria is innovation. So if this is a population that, you know, typically isn't included in grant proposals, that could really help us with that criteria, and that would be very appealing for us as the lead applicant. And also, I think, you know, we, at least in the School of Public Health, you know, we are willing to work with organizations to get them on board and get them able to participate in these proposals with us, as long as, again, there's that responsiveness and willingness to work through the issues, because you know, there are always going to be roadblocks, especially, you know, when you're working with federal grants and with a huge organization. But as long as you're willing to come to the table and work through those, I think that's one of the big ones.
Thank you. I want to turn it over to Amy if you had anything to add of what makes proposals stand out.
Yeah, so that's a lot too, where we're looking at some of that impact. So is this innovative? Does it stand out? Is it duplicative? Some of the other things that we look at, especially in communities maybe who are working more on first-time applications, we're going to look at other material. We're not, you know, specifically in a tunnel narrow, only looking at what you submit. We're going to look at your website. We're going to look at your mission. We're going to look at your story and see where you've been, and to see if your mission aligns with ours, if and what else is kind of going on in your area and what you're working on. So we're going to look at that story, why you got to where you are, and why you're asking for what you're asking, and why you're doing what you're doing.
And I just want to piggyback on that one. So forewarned is forearmed. So if you know that about an agency, or if you, and in fact, I would suspect most foundations will do things like that, then you want to get ahead of the game, right? You want to point them to where they are going to see this information, and perhaps even supplement that so that you can pack it up. So, and that's, and by the way, that's part of what I also think is very, very critical, especially with foundations, but not only foundations, city, state, and all. Talk to program officers. That's what they're there for. They're there to serve grantees. They're not going to tell you what to do, but you're going to get a bunch of different insights from them and feedback and all, and it's almost always helpful.
And if I could just tack onto that a little bit, that's a great point, Mark. So my role as a program officer is really to advocate for you and for your work. So at our foundation, our trustees make all final funding decisions. So my job is to take your application and help gear it up and help prepare it to really pave the way in the boardroom. So to pave the way in those board conversations. And I think that's how a lot of foundations function. So and I've noticed for our foundation too, like I receive a grant application, and then I have an opportunity to talk with the applicant as well, and really hearing their stories. Sometimes they don't translate their stories well enough into their written application, which I think I'm very fortunate I'm at a foundation that I have that opportunity to talk to them, but not all foundations work like that. So you really want to get that story into your application as much as possible. You know, if you were talking to someone, if you were trying to advocate for this work, what would you be saying?
Thank you, everyone, for those great points. And I saw there was a comment in the chat asking if resumes are sufficient, and Sarah put in that in some cases, yes, but in some cases, no, you need more than that. I know particularly for NIH grants, they want bio sketches in a specific format. So Sarah, did you have anything else to add?
I was gonna just say for federal grants, resumes are not sufficient. They all have a very specific format for federal.
And
Yeah, so again, read the application.
I will add to that, actually, a lot of the federal grants, even though you may not know, which agency you're applying to, a lot of them require a personal statement as part of, it's usually called a biographical sketch. So that's going to translate your resume or CV to the biographical sketch. But usually at the beginning of that, it's going to require a personal statement. So that's something you could think about preparing in advance. And that little is like a paragraph that talks about your expertise, like what have you done before? What, how have you contributed to other projects that are similar? What types of collaborations have you had? You don't have to just use that for bio sketches. You can use that in your other grant proposals as well.
I love piggybacking on my colleagues here. That is a really great point. And the one thing I will add to that is boilerplating often doesn't work. That you wrote a nice bio. It's a really lovely bio. It's beautiful. It just doesn't make any sense for this particular proposal. It doesn't address those needs. So you really do need to think specifically about how this relates. One of the things I'd like to think about with a grant, and I tell folks that I'm working with, is we're telling a story in this grant. We're selling a story. We're really trying, and I heard it earlier, why us, why now, and all. That's your story, right? So everything you put in there should relate to your story. That's what you want to think about. Sometimes we use bold. Sometimes what I've said to people, particularly early career folks who are working on a grant for the first time, after every paragraph, I want you to write a sentence to tell me, reviewer, what did I just learn in that paragraph? Why is that paragraph important? Now, you might not keep all that in there. You may run out of room, but it's very helpful for you to think everything in your proposal should relate to the story you're telling. Why me? Why now? Including your bio.
I'm going to follow up on that too. When I don't know about how this works at foundations, but for federal panels, usually what happens is, there's a whole bunch of proposals. Like the ones I've been on, maybe 20, 30, 40 that get reviewed over a period of like maybe 1 to 3 days. And so not everybody reads all of them, right? You get assigned like maybe 10 that you have to read. And of those, some subset, you're the primary person. So you have to say what it was about, right? So you start the conversation. Okay, here's, this team from this and such and such place, and they're going to, they're going to look at cornfields that are plowed and not plowed, and they're going to measure this and this and this, and it's going to answer this such and such question. I think it's really great because of these reasons, but I had these concerns. These are the weaknesses I saw. And then the other reviewers will also chime in, right? And then the rest of the panel might ask questions, and then there'll be some discussion about it, and you have some sort of consensus score for it. So you need to have, your thing needs to be a story, and it needs to be very tight and clear so that somebody can remember after they've read 10 proposals 2 weeks ago what yours was about, and be able to advocate for it. Like, you guys, it was so exciting. This thing, man, I really want to see this funded, right? So like punchy and clear. And so if you do have weaknesses, how are you going to address them? What's your contingency plans, that kind of thing. So I know I just gave a science research example, but it should translate.
But I think
that's
that
perfect.
works.
It kind of brings us into the next question about how you communicate these things in the text of the proposal. So I have 2 questions, going to lump them together. Do you have any tips for organizations to communicate their mission and vision, their partnerships, really like telling that story, like Mark said? Mark, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I'll just show me, don't tell me. That's my pithy response to that. Aspirations are nice, but data's better.
Thank you. Robin, do you have any tips for how to communicate those important things in the proposal?
Yeah, sure. So I think, one of the questions you shared with us in advance was also, how do you communicate partnerships in your proposal. And I would say that that gets back to the letters of support and the points that Amy made earlier about those being specific and talking about the contributions that the providers of those letters of support are making, whether those are organizations or whether those are individuals. Those can be really important. I've seen, proposals get reviewed and they, it will say, the proposal will say that we're gonna, work with a certain population, but we weren't able to include a letter of support at the time of the proposal, and then that proposal would not be funded. That's how important it is. Just showing that you have that key partner, that they've made the commitment, that they're willing to participate.
Thank you. Amy or Sarah, whoever's ready.
I was just gonna add on to real quick. We also, like I said before, we're gonna do our homework. We're gonna look at your website. We're gonna, we do want to see your mission, your vision. We do watch out for mission drift within organizations that are kind of might be more chasing the money and transitioning to match with our foundation. But the other thing I was gonna say, like with the partnerships, is we're really interested in the relationship there, and that it's not just a superficial partnership. So how did the partnership get started? Is this just specifically for this project and then you're not going to be partners anymore? Or kind of, is there a benefit of these organizations partnering? So we really look to see a little more engagement in that work.
Thank you. Sarah?
I put a link to this book in the chat called The Narrative Gym. It's like $5 and it seriously took me 1 hour to read it. And this will frame how I start persuasive writing forevermore. It was so great. I only discovered this book about a year ago. It has this framework of and, but, therefore. So your very beginning of your argument would be, we have this and we have that, but we're missing this. Therefore, we need to do this with the money. Or whatever it is. And it's so straightforward and so simple. And then once you start seeing that, they use examples from like Oprah and all kinds of famous speeches and stuff. And it's really a great way to sort of format your main argument, like your thesis statement.
That's a great tip. I always love writing tips. So particularly as it relates to smaller organizations that maybe don't have a history of large funding, what are ways that organizations can communicate or show their fiscal responsibility? And I'll kick that to Robin first.
Sure. So some of the things that I see asked for is, do you have an accounting method? And if so, can you just describe that in one sentence? What is it? Do you have a timekeeping method or a method for tracking people's effort on the projects? That's something that federal grants are going to be looking for. Are you audited? If you're audited, you can say that you are. If you're a sub-award, an applicant who has federal money, you should be prepared to share that audit. Have you received or managed prior awards? Do you have the ability to invoice? And are you prepared to provide regular progress reports? So those are several of the things that I see come up for our sub-award partners.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything to add to that list?
I was reflecting, sorry, I was reflecting. I was actually looking for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting had a nice little thing on writing a grant, but I couldn't find it, so I'm sorry. But what I just was reflecting on was, I was going back to letters of recommendation, and I'm sort of perseverating on this idea that you don't want to write them for people, but yet I've always written like my colleagues out there, you guys, we might be collaborating, and I know you're busy and you're not going to write it. But here's the story on that. This is what I'm reflecting on. And I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but that's just my nature. So there's two things about it. First of all, when I'm on a grant, I want people to write me a letter because I want to know what they want me to do. I want to be specific about what is it you're looking for me to do, and then I go in and edit it. And I'll fill in stuff and I'll correct some things and all. So I think that's one thing you can ask your colleagues. But the second thing is when we write them, I think about who you are, your organization, and what you have to offer. So I want this to sing. I want this to make sense. I want this to be something that sounds like something you can do. It's not, so saying things like, I'm very supportive of this is really a wonderful project, is not very convincing. But talking a little bit about your organization in my letter that I'm writing for you, and then saying some things like that, those are the kinds of things that I think make a letter work. And then you read it and you go, yeah, that's us. I'm happy to sign this. That'll make sense. So I just wanted to share that. So I'm off task, but sorry.
That's okay, Mark. I think that was a good point because that's always what happens. Like the lead applicant almost always writes the letters for the partners. But I think it's an art, like how well it's done definitely shows on the reviewer end. And so the best letters are written where you can't tell that they don't look like boilerplate or templates. You can't tell that the organization didn't write them because the person, inviting the organization really knows what they're about, knows what they need from them. And then, the organization always obviously gets the opportunity to tweak that letter and make their revisions. And what you can do is you can put comments in that letter when you send it off to them and say, is this right? Do you want to do something different? Did I get this right about your organization? And call it out, because if you don't call out where you need the input, then I find that sometimes folks won't make those changes that would really kind of help refine that letter to make it great.
Yeah, this gets back to that earlier point about what you can do ahead of time. If you're doing all this at the last minute, obviously this is going to be very stressful for your colleagues. Now, I will personally tell you that my own view is I've never finished a grant. I've just run out of time, right? When the deadline hits, I stop. And I'm always editing and I'm always editing. So some of the stuff, I don't want to put you through that, but there are times when we write a letter and then suddenly, a month later, the grant looks a little different and I got to go back in there and all. So it's a little nutty that way, but you want to have that kind of communication. But the main thing is to be thoughtful ahead of time and to know who you're writing this for, or indeed, because honestly, what someone's going to give you if you leave it to them is a boilerplate. We're very supportive of grants. Grants are very important to us and all that, and that's not going to sing as well. So I do think that's a relationship. And depending on if it's a new relationship, you're not going to lean on them too much. You want to do as much for them as you can and make it as easy as you can. But you also want to be specific and clear in there so that when Amy reads it, she goes, yeah, that sounds like the agency. That's the art, right? And there we go.
Thank you. Amy, do you have anything to add?
I think that's fantastic with the letters, and yes, the templates are great, but I need to see some of that personalization in there. I need to see that the partner organizations know what they're doing and what they're committing to, and that they're not just using your language. I did want to jump back to the fiscal responsibility. I think that's so important for small organizations getting started. So if that's okay, I'm going to jump back over there. I'm going to post in the chat a link. So we actually use GuideStar. I don't know if you're familiar with this. We use GuideStar to check 501c3 status. All of your financial information, your tax forms is in there. So if you're applying for a grant, do check to make sure that you're up to date in GuideStar. That should be free to do. We also look at revenues and expenses. We look to see if your revenues are greater or lesser than your expenses. And if there's a mismatch there, we look for the explanation of, oh, they just sold off something last year, so there is something going on. But we do look into those finances to make sure that we're going to support an organization that is not about to go out of business. And then we work as hard as possible to try to understand that and recognize the real life difficulties, and so that we have faith that the work can go forward. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is we look for tipping. So you want to ask for an amount that is reasonable within your net assets. So it is a responsible foundation will be cautious not to give too many funds to tip the organization. So you're receiving more funds from that one grant than what you're getting from all of your other assets, from your revenue streams. We do not want you to be reliable strictly on one foundation. So if you're trying to figure out how much to ask for, do know that we will look at what are your total assets and how does that play into your financial structure.
Yeah, a couple of things about finances. So once again, this is a theme I'm going to say over and over, don't fake it. If you haven't done this before, partner. And actually, I'll give you a quick story. When I first came to Chicago, we got a grant from the Polk Foundation. But I was at UIC, I'm still at UIC, and Polk Foundation said, we don't trust UIC. So I had to partner with Youth Guidance. So Youth Guidance managed the funds, and then we did the work, right? A little embarrassing, but nevertheless, we've improved. So I think we can take in grants and contracts. But partnering is important. Collaboration is the key to a successful grant. The other thing I want to say about finances, and this is a bit of a spin-off, and Amy, maybe you can comment on this, but return on investment is a lot of times what foundations are thinking about. In other words, they're investing in this, but as Amy said, they don't want you relying on this entirely. That's very typical for foundations. It's absolutely true for a number of government things. When we write grants in the mental health services world, I'm not allowed to put providers into my grant. I have to use existing providers. So one of the spin-offs on financial, I'm backing up the financial plan, is showing that you have a plan for how to keep this going after the grant ends. Perhaps you're going to get bill fee for service. Perhaps you're going to use it to support fundraising, and you're going to be able to do that. I don't know. That's probably not so great, but that's the only other thing I can think of other than fee for service. But so that's the only other thing I wanted to say is this return on investment. You want to be able to show that this investment, it makes sense, that you're going to use it well, and that you have the support either through a partner or through your own organization.
Yep, I'm happy to tack on to that. So if you are a new organization, if you don't have assets that are high enough to support the work you want to do, if you work with a fiscal agent, we will fund the fiscal agent, and the fiscal agent is signing off on responsibility for that grant. In terms of fiscal agents here in Chicago, I don't know off the top of my head, but I did have an organization I was working with last year who needed a fiscal agent. We did a lot of looking in Chicago. There are some organizations that their purpose is as fiscal agents. Not many in Chicago, a lot more like on the East Coast, West Coast. But there are organizations that you could find that do that, or other like-minded organizations that you could partner with. In terms of, and let's see, Mark, I was going to comment on that other point. Oh, return on investment. So when we fund, we very much say we are not a charity. We're not going to fund you to do general operations, the good work that you're already doing. We look for our direct service work. We look to fund new programs or great expansions of existing work. And with those, what we do is we'll fund 1 year at a time. Year one is fine, ask for the funds that you need. Year two, we like to see support from your organization kick in. And year three, we like to see even more support. So that's getting at that ROI and that business plan. So part of year two is going to be you coming up with that business plan to have your own funding moving forward. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is looking to other funding structures. But if you know of those, if you're aware of those, if you have partnerships in place, that's all going to be helpful.
Well, and think about it this way. The last thing you want to do is get 3 years of funding to do something wonderful and then have it fall apart. I think that's often bad for the organization. That hits morale. You're now hiring staff and firing staff. So, I mean, thinking about this ahead of time and saying, well, how are we going to keep this going? And then having that in your grant, that really is in your best interest as an organization.
Amy, do you have in your mind an example of a successful sustainability strategy that you've seen before?
I don't want to point to any specific ones. A lot of times, I mean, a lot of kind of social work stuff that we do where they create, there's a new program, there's research behind a program, and an organization says, this is fantastic, we want to do this in our organization. So maybe they're going to start, they need to hire the staff member before they could get that started. So they're going to, in their first year of funding, they're going to request for a full-time staff member. They're going to start implementing this, then they're going to get the structure set up for billing. They're going to make those necessary connections. So we've kind of seen some of that work successfully. We've also seen where organizations are setting up new partnerships and referrals. So this happened a lot with COVID. A lot of organizations that were community-based organizations doing social services, maybe not doing mental health services. Some of them actually just needed 1 year. Let's establish this referral source, and how do we screen for mental health needs, because we're seeing those rise so much and they're impacting our clients. And then how do we make warm referrals successful? So we've kind of seen that. We've also seen a lot of success in partnerships where an organization starts out working in one area. Year 2 is partnering to get the right resources in the right places. So there's a variety of different ways to do that. And like I said, unfortunately, some of them too are, well, we need to get government funding for this. We're going to start, year 1 is going to be our pilot. Year 2, once we get some of this data, then we'll be able to apply to the NIH or to a larger funding agency that really has resources to sustain us, to get us a little more standing on our feet.
I have a couple of examples I can offer, projects that we've done. So one thing is, let's say that you have this idea to develop a mentoring program for youth in your community, and you're going to write a grant to do it. But now you're thinking, but I want to keep this going. So who could you partner with in your community that could help you with that? Let's say a Boys and Girls Club. How about a school? And so the point is, they have the staff, the school have the kids, or even parents. The other thing, we have a grant going on right now that's funded through the Institute for Education Sciences through my colleague at DePaul, Kathy Grant. We have a subcontract at UIC, in which Kathy is looking at using university students, undergraduates, to mentor Chicago Public School students. She's been doing that for years as a service learning opportunity. And now we're studying it at Northwestern, UIC, and Loyola in addition, to show that this is a generalizable model. So from an agency's perspective, in this case it's the university, but it doesn't have to be, if you partner with a university to say, our undergraduates need these service opportunities, they can provide this, and then we're going to study it. That would be another way to show that you've got a plan to keep this going.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have anything to add? All right, we'll go on to the next question. And I think this will be our last question before we take a break in about 8 minutes. I was hoping if everyone could share, are there any red flags or things that you see in proposals that show that that organization maybe isn't a good fit for an opportunity? So I'll start with you, Sarah.
So I would, my experience here is less about the a community organization. So if you can extrapolate here a little bit, but I see this with teams all the time within UIC, where they see a funding opportunity and they think, oh, this one, and it's like they just don't read what it's supposed to be, you know, like, oh, they want it for this research grant, but they're supposed to work with all of these like companies, and they don't have any of those relationships established, or you know, they want to do this thing, you know, something with, I don't know, mentoring, since we've been using that example, but that's only a tiny bit of the call. So like you have to read the call and see what it's actually asking for. And I think the other thing that sometimes happens is people are like, well, we just need to get a grant. We just need to get a grant to do this. But you have to look for the right one, right? So that you kind of have to be paying attention to what's coming down the pike, the grant opportunities, and then wait for one that's going to fit with what you really want to do, or you need to be able to respond and develop an idea that will match what the sponsor is asking for.
Thank you. Amy, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, Sarah, I 100% agree. We see that and we see that just saying, don't chase the funding. You don't want to, oh, we're going to go here. We're going to go here because this is open. This is open. No, you need to do what which is so hard. And like I said, I did research in community-based organizations. I applied for all of these grants from community. And it's really hard because, right, you do need the funding. That's the fact of the matter. But you need the right funding. We do look for fit, exactly the word that's in the question. We're looking for, like I said before, we're looking at your mission, your vision. Does it fit with what we're looking to fund? Are we aligned in what we're seeing as the important outcomes and even the methods and strategies to get there? And do you have that track record that was going, that you're not just molding what you're doing to fit with us, but that we had an aligned vision? So for us, improving quality of life for older adults, is that your mission, your vision, where you're going with your practice, where you're going with your research? And it's okay if that's not your primary function. If you're a healthcare organization and that is part of what you're doing, that's fine. It doesn't have to be everything, but we do need to see that fit.
It's going to be heartache if you get a grant that you really can't do. If you're mushing your ideas into something that isn't quite right, you're going to be stuck doing that if it gets funded, and then you're going to have that horrible sinking feeling all the time, because you can't actually carry out the work. I've been there. It's bad. You don't want to dread going to work because you have this burden, or oh my gosh, it's time to do the annual report and we haven't done anything. No, you want to feel proud of it all.
That's a good point, Sarah. And the reading from the first class last week was actually about how sometimes when there's not a match for the funder priorities and the organization's priorities, that can negatively impact the organization, especially when you have a pretty focused mission. So that's, another point to make there, is that you want a good fit so that you can continue to do the work that you want to do.
Yeah, and I'll just comment that I think these are all 100% correct. And I've reviewed a lot of grants in my time, and I will say I've never seen a perfect grant ever. So you don't want to ignore the priorities, but to say that you're able to do something that you can't, you have no track record in it, and you're not backing it up, and it's all aspirational, as I mentioned, show me, don't tell me. I think that's the kind of red flag stuff. And so being as responsive as you can, but showing how unique you are. You might be outstanding in this one area that just makes you stand out in a way that others don't, even though you haven't done that. And what I've also seen, I also see this at the William T. Grant Foundation, that they will then come in and supplement it. They'll say, you know what, we see that you're not so great with that. We're going to help you with that. We're going to provide a consultant to help you with, right? Because they're so committed, because this applicant made such a strong case about why their uniqueness has them stand out. So that's, go with your strengths. Don't ignore the other stuff. Comment on it, but don't try to fluff over it or pretend you can do something you can't.
Thanks so much. Does anyone have anything else to add before we take our break? Okay, so I know Maggie has been collecting questions through the chat. So we'll take a 7-minute break. Come back at 11:15, and we'll have about half an hour to do some Q&A with the panel. So everyone go stretch your legs, get water, coffee, food, whatever you need. I'll see you in a little bit. All right, everyone. That's the end of our break. I'll just give folks a minute to come back on. So I do have a list of questions that Maggie sent me, have been in the chat, and invite folks, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll try to answer those as they come, or you're welcome to unmute and state your question if you're comfortable with that. So our first question for the Q&A, and maybe this will go over to Amy first. Are you more interested in innovative and new proposals, or do programs or organizations that have been funded for years and have a consistent impact weigh heavier? So those contrast of programs that have been going on a long time and have a demonstrated impact versus something new and innovative.
I think we're interested in both. It really, really, really depends on the impact, the significance, the work, where it's going, what that track record is, what that history is. Like I said, we don't give general operating dollars. So if you're doing good work, that's wonderful, that's great. We do primarily fund new projects or expanding current work. Yeah, I think there's, the other thing I was going to say is, though, we are always looking for new partners that we aren't familiar with, that we haven't worked for in the past. So we are not a foundation that, well, we found our partners and we're happy and they're doing good things. That's great. We really like to balance that out and continuously work to hear what's going on in the field and meet new partners and move the field forward into new directions.
Thank you. Sarah, I was wondering if you have anything to add to that question of what weighs heavier, the innovative and new, or the demonstrated impact programs?
I think it depends on the solicitation. I mean, I think that usually it can be pretty clear. Like if something from like the Health Resources Service Administration, HRSA, you know, like they're one of the ones that provide service, and they'll often do funding for service providing, and they'll often do them for a really long time, right? So like how much there may be a little bit less on the innovation and more on impact. Whereas, or you know, sometimes it's like with a cooperative agreement, it's less about something exciting and more about getting done exactly what the sponsor wants done. So I think it depends.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is that sometimes there's a way that you can do both. That, let's say, I gave the example earlier about you don't have the background in something, but you have a very unique population and you play to that. Well, here, let me just play this out. Let's say that we've been doing this service for a while, but this organization, I called Amy and I talked to her and I found out they're really into new and innovative. What's new and innovative that we can do given our track record? And then what I'm doing, I'm making a case, is that we have lots of success doing this. Here's my data. Now we want to take it here because nobody's ever done that. And certainly we haven't. So we'd like to use this opportunity to do that. So you can see what I'm trying to do. I'm playing into my strength, but I'm also trying to be very responsive. To the extent that I can pull it off, wonderful. I might run it by Amy and she might say, you know, that's interesting. You might want to give that a whirl and all that. Or if she says, I don't think that's really going to fly, then we'll go somewhere else. But that's the only thing I can think of there, is that sometimes you can manage to work with your strengths and go in a new direction.
Yeah. Robin, do you have anything else to add to that question?
I'll let Amy respond first. I think she has something to say.
I was just going to tap on what I remember doing in grant proposals in the past, where, right, when a funder is not looking to fund same old, right? We don't want to fund the same thing over and over and over unless it's fantastic, but maybe how are we looking at it differently? I remember creating a logic model, which I think you'll be learning about later in this course, and actually highlighting this is the innovative piece. So really bringing the program officer or the reviewer's attention directly to the piece that makes this work stand out above what other people are doing in the field. So I would be very open and share, this is the thing that makes this interesting and innovative.
I think if it's true, you can say things like no other organization in Chicago is meeting X need. If that's true. But you have to establish why there's that need. Like, why isn't anybody doing it? And then how are you going to be able to do it in a way that they haven't been able to?
So I would just add that, so, whether a reviewing organization is going to look more at impact or innovation, I think that Sarah brought up a good point about what did the solicitation ask for, and also kind of what stage are you at in the program that you're proposing. So is it new, something you want to test? If so, it might be more innovative, right? So they're going to be looking to see, like, how is this different from other programs? What will we learn from funding this that could have a benefit, an impact later on? Whereas if it's something that's more of like a proven kind of program that you just want to scale up, then they're going to be looking more at impact. So again, it depends on what stage you're looking for funding your program.
Thank you. So the next question that was put in the chat is, what is most impactful in your opinion, the quantitative or qualitative data to demonstrate those stories of impact? So I think I'll start with Mark, because you talked about show me, don't tell me.
I love reading qualitative data in grants. Sometimes it's hard because you don't have a lot of room and you want to tell a story. I really recommend a little of both. I think that's going to play the best. Let me just say it this way: qualitative data, which you've gotten from a particular group of folks. Sometimes it's a convenience sample, but sometimes it's a group that you've really sought out because we don't know much about delivering this particular service to this group. And we interviewed 6 or 7 folks, and here's some of the things they told us, and we're going to go with that. That's terrific. That sets up some hypotheses and all that. You certainly don't want to say, therefore this is true for the whole entire population of so on. On the other hand, with the quote quantitative data, which, because qualitative can be quantitative, but anyway, you've got rating scale data and so on. Well, sometimes that's not hitting on all the right points. You're forced into a format there. So a little of both can really sing very well. Again, your job is to make that story make sense and to show that you understand your data and that this is why these data are useful to support your proposal.
Thank you. Robin, do you have anything to add to that? I know you work with a lot of organizations.
Yeah, can you actually just repeat the question one more time, how you had it phrased about
yeah, this person asked, what's most impactful from your opinion, quantitative or qualitative data / stories of impact?
Okay. Yeah, so again, I would say that this depends on your audience, right? So if you're sending a proposal to a bunch of biostatisticians, they probably are going to want to see some quantitative data. Whereas if you're sending your proposal to a foundation that mainly funds service providers, then they may be more interested in some of the qualitative stories. And I would agree with Mark that that doing both is a good idea. So if you have some metrics you can put in there about some of the achievements that you've made, plus maybe some quotes or stories or kind of things that you've learned from your past work, I think that is also compelling as well.
Can I just offer one thing? I really like that point that Robin's making, and I just want to say something about the stories you tell. when I'm reading this and I'm looking at quotes of people are going, this is a really great service. I love these people. They're really wonderful. That's not as persuasive to me as a reviewer as when I read something that says, here's the issue that I was dealing with, and here's what they did to help me with that. And here's how they stayed with me, or something like that, something kind of unique. That's what qualitative data can really do. It can really dig a little deeper, get to people's story a little bit. So I would recommend staying away from the kind of easy evaluation. 72% of the people said they like our services and all that. It's easy. I mean, actually data like that, I suppose, but anyway, but it's easy to say that stuff. Much better to have something very unique and specific. That's what I would recommend. That's what sings to me as a reviewer.
Yeah. Amy, do you have anything to add from the foundation perspective?
I think very similar. We're going to look for the strongest data possible, but different situations have different data available. So sometimes certainly we recognize that there is only anecdotal information. We do very much look for the type of data to suggest, if we build it, will they come? Like, do you have an express need for the work that you're proposing? And want to see something along those lines. So anecdotal data is better than no data. And a lot of community-based organizations are not in a situation where they're able to have kind of statistical analysis done and anything like that. So we like to see some sort of data, some sort of ability to start collecting information, to start looking at your impact, understanding what you're doing. All sorts of organizations just have different capacities for data management at this point, it seems. So the stronger, the better, qualitative or quantitative, it's going to depend on the situation and what really captures the work that you're doing best. Would be great. And we'll tell you, if you submit something that's qualitative and says, then, we might say, well, that's really interesting, but it seems that you can have some quantitative numbers to back this up. Or maybe you give us a bunch of numbers like what Mark was saying, those numbers that just really don't have much value. And I'll say, okay, this is great, but I need more of the story here. I need to know something from the people you're working with, what's going on here.
Having both. So Sarah, I was wondering if you had anything to add in terms of, like, for federal contracts and grants, if there's a more higher emphasis on qualitative versus quantitative data.
I don't really have a strong opinion on this. I think probably I would usually, my go-to would be quantitative data, but it depends on what you're trying to show, what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So next we have a more general question. So this is open to whoever wants to take it. How does one create the connection for a consultant, or where does one look for one? So I think this question came up when we were talking about, playing to your strengths and finding someone to come in when you don't necessarily have those strengths. So how does someone create the connection to find a consultant or partner like that?
Okay, I'll take a stab. Those are best thought of as relationships, and I like to say that academic collaboration is an unnatural act between two or more non-consenting adults, right? So it's not easy. It isn't for everyone. So getting a consultant at the last minute who looks really good on paper but has no commitment to your project, has no relationship with your agency, probably isn't going to be as compelling as spending the time to get to know an organization, a university, for instance, if you're looking at that, or another organization. I was reviewing grants for the city of Chicago that was looking at partnering social services with primary care. And those relationships are what was really important to determine. The one thing that I would say about that from my end as a university researcher, my job at the CCTS is to prepare other researchers to go out into community and develop those relationships with you all. So from the university's perspective, and UIC I think is particularly unique, or at least I think it's something that we have a real commitment to. There are many people at the university who are eager to get these relationships established. I would encourage you to get to know them and try to invite people, and the earlier you can do that, the better. Just get to know them. And I'm going to play off. I think, Robin, you were saying the last thing you want to do is get a grant that you can't use. I think wasn't that your point? And I think that's true with a collaboration. The last thing you want is a collaboration you can't shake. You know, it's like, how do I get rid of this guy? You know, he's really bugging me, that kind of stuff. So I think getting to know them early. But keep in mind, there are many people who are interested in these kind of collaborations. So it's a matter of networking and getting to know them.
Thanks, Meg. I think that was Sarah, and that was a
Oh, that was Sarah that said that. Okay.
But just to, think a little bit more about like, where do you find consultants? Obviously it depends on what kind of, consulting services you need. In addition to, you mentioned academic partnerships as one avenue. Another avenue is sometimes there are other nonprofits that have services or kind of departments within some of the larger nonprofits that might offer, say they have a research kind of group or something that can perform evaluation services for you. So in that way, they're still a nonprofit, so they might have some understanding of what your needs are as a nonprofit and be able to help you in that way. Also, there are some for-profit companies out there that offer pro bono services to nonprofits. So another thing to take a look at as well. Some of the big consulting firms out there offer pro bono services as well. But again, this depends on what you need a consultant for. So in that case, the consultant might not be for working on a specific project. It might just be someone to help you with a strategic plan about how you're going to apply for your projects in the future, and how you're going to get other consultants on board in the future and who those might be.
I can add on too. You could also check in with the foundation, because we do fund capacity building for small organizations. So we have $5,000 grants and also $50,000 grants for various types of partnership development, planning purposes, strategic planning, and we have a list of consultants on hand for those purposes, for those grants.
One more maybe source I can suggest is also, if you know what you want consulting for, some professional associations sometimes have like membership lists or people certified in certain skill sets. So like one example, the American Evaluation Association has a list of their members with their websites if they're doing their own consultancies. So thank you all for sharing all those resources. So another question from the audience, and I think, Robin, this will go first to you. This person said, sometimes development and grant writing staff are not experts in the services or programs within the grant. For example, in research grants, there are often technical processes that need to be funded and described. Do you have any tips on A, how to work with technical partners to collect information to include in the grants, and B, how to translate that technical information into all parts of the grant?
I saw this question come up and I love it. It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna make Sarah help answer it too, because she does that. She has to do this all the time. First of all, there's no good answer to this. It's always chaos. I think that having somebody who can be a good project manager and kind of lead the team as you're developing a proposal that includes both, say, a grant writer and some technical writers is really helpful if you can do that. Sometimes Sarah will serve in that role for us. I'm sure that she's trying to get away from that, but it's really helpful when someone can be there and keep track of, say, all of the components of the proposal based on what the funding announcement is and what, all of those points that need to be hit are within the call for proposals. And then they can help direct people to the parts where, say, they need a technical response. And a lot of times we'll use some kind of cloud-based sharing platform to do that, whether it's Google Docs or Box or something like that. so that everybody can kind of see what is happening. And that way, say a grant writer can get a preliminary view of what the technical writer is writing and ask questions as they're working on the other components. So I'm going to stop there and see if Sarah has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I do. And I think I agree with everything Robin just said. I would say that if you have something that's very technical, that technical person should write that section, right? They should write it for themselves. You should tell them, this is how much space you have. This is, you should be talking about what you need from them, right? So I have a really good example for this where we wrote a grant to do a really big construction project. So it needed to demonstrate a scientific need, but then the bulk of it was written by this designed architects and construction people. And it was all these line drawings and construction plans and stuff. So obviously I didn't really know anything about that, but you still have a purpose to that, right? So I can tell you the purpose of that was we had an aging HVAC system. We were moving it to the roof. When we did that, it freed up space inside to put more labs. And I can tell you, we by having, 4 air handlers, now we had duplication, so if one went out. So I know I can convey to you the purpose of those very technical specs, right? So those technical specs still need to be right, and so that a technical expert would review them and be able to find weaknesses or strengths or problems or whatever. But when you're putting that around the rest of the grant, you should still have your one sentence, why are we doing this? And then that I think can fit elsewhere. And a non-expert grant writer should be able to then present that in a compelling way.
I really like what Sarah just said, and I want to emphasize the 2 components of it. One is you should expect that a technical person is going to review that section. Doesn't always happen, but you should anticipate that. But then I really like that point about, but you make it integrated into your grant with the 1 sentence lead, or perhaps a few sentences that talk about how this is going to work for you. One example I'll give in a kind of more of a social service away from architecture, but would be something along the lines of administrative data. So going to be analyzing the administrative data. Administrative data is very sloppy, very messy. You want somebody who knows what they're doing, who knows how to do that, and you're not overstating it. But you're talking about how that administrative data is going to be useful to your program, to your grant, how it's going to be fed back to your staff, how it's going to be whatever. So I think those are a couple of things. Is keep in mind that the technical stuff will be read by a technical person, so don't fake it. At least in the world that I wind up in.
Thank you. Amy, do you have anything to add?
I very much agree with what was stated, that we do send off technical pieces for review by experts in each of those fields. I also just want to loop this into if this is okay, to the question that just popped up about comment on using different writing styles in a proposal. What style of writing do funders appreciate? So I think that's also, for the technical pieces is where it relates. I'm looking for the technical responses to that, as well, data analysis, evaluation. I need to see that the right analyses are put in place in the right places. In terms of writing style, though, here at RRF, we don't have a strict preference, but that's something that very much read the directions, look what the writing is on the site. Oftentimes, a lot of foundations, a lot of organizations will put example proposals on their website, read those, talk with other people who have partnered with that foundation in the past. But someone actually asked me this question recently: should I use first person or third person? I don't care. I just want to see what you're doing and have it clear and coherent throughout, so I could read through it and understand what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to go on to that next question, so I want to open it up to the others. The question was, can you comment a bit on using different writing styles in a proposal? Is there a particular style that funders appreciate, or reviewers?
one thing I'll say about that, and I think Amy nailed it pretty well, but be kind to your reviewers. Don't try to pack so many words in there. You know, you have a lot of stuff you want to say, you have a limited amount of space, so you use, first of all, pay attention to the font size, because grant funders are now onto that. So you can't do 10 or 9 point or whatever. Pay attention to that. But also, it doesn't even help you. So when I'm reviewing grants, particularly, but even when I'm mentoring folks on grant writing, I will cut like crazy. I know that was a lovely paragraph, but it happened to be about 2 sentences that went about 32 pages, all right? I mean, you're not James Joyce here, right? That's not the point. You want to be clear and good to your reviewers. Make it easy. Somebody was referring earlier, you know, we've got 6 to 10 of these to review. We don't have a lot of time. We're doing it on the weekends and in the evening. Be kind. Use some spacing. Paragraph spacing helps. Use a reasonable font size, but also try to say less. My favorite quote in grant writing is from George Bernard Shaw, who apologized to a friend for writing a long letter because he didn't have time to write a short one, right? It takes time to do that well, to do that succinctly. And one thing I'll just offer as an aside, have other people read your grant, particularly people outside your field. My wife's an artist. She reads all my grants. She doesn't read it for the technical stuff. Did that make sense? Do you understand what I'm doing? If she can't understand it, if she doesn't know where I'm going with this, I have to go back and correct it, okay? I'm not, and again, the technical stuff is different, but there's a story I'm telling here, and if it's not coming through. So I think in terms of writing style, if it's clear, and I think that's what Amy was saying. If it's clear and concise, I think it's gonna fly. This isn't literature here. You're not writing a novel. You're writing a story, if you will.
That's definitely a pet peeve of mine, when someone writes and writes and writes and writes, and I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, this is so interesting, and I'm like going down this one path of all this interesting information, and then realize, but wait a minute, this doesn't really pertain to what they're doing. So they gave me all this great information that I just spent an hour of my day reading that really isn't relevant to what's going on. So if it is not supporting your thesis, if it is not relevant to what you are trying to do, don't include it.
Can I make 2 points?
Yes, absolutely.
So I volunteer a lot with a super teeny nonprofit, and it's really interesting because me and the single employee of that nonprofit have really different styles and approaches. So I'm used to, writing all these grants for federal sponsors. So sometimes we're trying to get grants. They're always to foundations. And my style tends to be relatively formal. I try to maintain a really active voice, shorter sentences. I see so many run-on sentences and proposals, and people are trying to cram stuff in, and it's just impossible to read. So keep your sentences to like under 30 words. Anyway, so I have a more formal style, and then she'll go through and she like makes it very like chipper and perky, and like adds all these exclamation points, and it's so different. And you can see that we're always editing back and forth to get it in the other voice. And I don't know which is right for the types of sponsors that we're going for, but it's just a funny thing. The other thing I was going to say is having somebody else read your stuff is so important. And I think a key for that is managing your anxiety. In fact, I would say one of the biggest things for any type of writing that you're doing, for almost any scenario, any context, is managing your anxiety about it. Everybody feels nervous. Everybody is afraid to show someone else. You might not realize that's the reason that you're not wanting to show people, or that you're procrastinating. It is anxiety. And so finding ways to manage that, I think, will serve you so well for absolutely anything you're going to write ever, for any reason. And one thing that can be helpful is if you can find a good person to partner with. So like right now, I've got this colleague that I work with where if I can start a draft, he'll go through and edit it and finish it. We're both good at starting, we're both good at editing, but like this is a way we found that we both manage our anxiety about things. So if I don't feel like it has to sound perfect, if I'm just getting the ideas on the page and I know he's going to take it over, I'm so freed to just barf stuff up, right? Same for him. If he doesn't have to worry about exactly what's getting said to start with, and he knows that someone else is going to do that, and he's going to go through and polish it up, he gets it done so much faster. So if you can find a good writing partner, I think that can be really effective.
So I'm going to build on something you just said. So time is your friend. So getting words on the page earlier than later will ultimately result in a better proposal. So if you can get them on the page, even if they're not perfect yet, and then work to refine them, make them more concise, succinct, shorter, get to the point, explain why it's important. That's always good. Another point that I kind of thought of, we're talking about writing to reviewers, being kind to reviewers. If you ever get the opportunity to review grants, consider taking that opportunity so you can get to see what it's like on the other side. So when I work with young investigators, I always recommend that they do that, because I think that we run actually an internal grant program for our faculty, but that was a very eye-opening experience for me to be in the room and to hear all the things that were brought up about grants as they were being reviewed.
I just wanted to say, I put something in the chat. I liked Sarah's point about managing your anxiety. This is a book called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. It's about writing. And she has a lot of nice stuff in there. But one of the things she says that I like a lot, she talks a lot of, I won't tell you what Bird by Bird's about. Read it. It's a fun book, by the way. But it's basically just doing it one at a time. But anyway, she points out that, sometimes it's hard to get started. And I love this point she makes. The only person who's going to read your first draft is you. So write it. Just get it down on paper, and then you can edit and before you share. But then, really, to Sarah's point, the more feedback you get, the better it's going to go. But you don't have to do it right away if you can get started early. So, but anyway, Bird by Bird's a lot of fun if you get a chance to read it.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think, Maggie, do we have time for this last question that just got posted?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I'll read it for everyone. Related to reviewing grants, how do you incorporate reviewer feedback into future submissions of the same RFP, especially from federal government grants? So say this got rejected this time, any tips for trying again? And maybe Sarah, I'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, okay, so I think my first comment is to understand how the review panels are formed for the sponsor. So for example, National Science Foundation, the panels are made new ad hoc every time. And so you might not get the same panelists again and again. And so you might have somebody who hates this thing, and then the next time it gets reviewed, you have somebody else and they love that thing. NIH has these standing study sections, so it will go back to the same people. So that's my first thought. Then what I say is, when you get those reviews, you're going to be mad. It's going to hurt. Put them away for a couple weeks and then come back when you can be a little bit more objective. And then I would say take each comment and then write a response to it. Think about, was this right or not? Were they, did they have a good point here? And how am I going to address it? Or how am I going to dismiss it? It might be like, yeah, but no, right? And then give your evidence for that you can incorporate then into your next version. And the last thing I would say is sometimes you feel like, these reviewers just didn't understand. Like, that's not what I meant at all. That's on you. If they didn't understand, you didn't convey it clearly enough, right? So you need to figure out, like, they aren't wrong. If they misunderstood it, if they read it wrong, whatever, if they were confused, you have to figure out how to say it more clearly so it will be unequivocal in your next draft.
So those are all excellent points. And I would just add one thing to understand if there are any rules about submitting responses to reviews. So just to highlight, NIH allows for one resubmission, and there is a one-page response to reviewers. Whereas if you are submitting for the third time to the same announcement, it's not a resubmission anymore, and you are not allowed to submit that response to reviewers. So you wouldn't want to, you're not allowed to refer to the previous reviews. You can still incorporate those changes into your proposal, but you can't say something like, well, in previous reviews, it was noted that, and then say why you changed it. So just to highlight there that sometimes sponsors will have rules about that, and to be aware of that.
Thank you. Amy or Mark, you have anything to?
What I would say is be responsive, not defensive. Stand up for yourself if it's important. If there's a component of it, I really appreciated Robin's point. If it didn't get across, that's on me. I'll go ahead and clarify. The other thing I'll say is that responsiveness may be the #1 most important thing that reviewers take a look at when they're looking at a resubmission. If it was reviewed previously and there was some favorable comments, but it didn't quite hit the funding threshold, that's great. Just go with that. But if you're not responsive, and again, not defensive, but responsive, to me, that's probably the #1 mark against you. Even if I'm a new reviewer, most review panels will honor, at least to some degree. You can't guarantee it. I mean, that was a really nice point Sarah made. It's very, very frustrating when you go in and you respond, and then they pick up on 12 other things that you don't have time to address. But most panels will honor the fact that this was reviewed. These were the issues that came up, and I think that's what you have to go on. You just have to assume that that's going to be the case. But the more responsive you can be. I like that point about, and this is what we do, I take every comment and I lay them out and I respond. Sometimes, by the way, my first stab at it is I just respond the way I feel, and I just lay it all out there, and okay, all right, I got that out of my system. Now I'm going to go back and be a little more thoughtful. Not all of that's going to get into the proposal, because not every comment is going to be useful. What can you do about that? Talk to program. Okay, program was probably at the review, or if they weren't at the review, they can find out from someone who was. What were the most important things that were discussed? Sometimes it's not discussed; it's triaged. In which case, you're just relying on the reviews. Then again, I would strongly recommend talking to program, because as Amy was saying, they're the ones, if it does get funded, they're the ones who are going to have to present it to the trustees or whoever is reviewing it.
An excellent point, Mark. I would say always reach out to the program officer and see if they're willing to discuss the reviews with you, so you can get some of that feedback about maybe what was said, or maybe what's important to the agency. And we all have a lot of experience here with NIH and NSF, which is very science focused, but some of the other agencies, like say the Health Resources and Services Administration or the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they're a little less straightforward as far as they don't have scientific program officers. Their program officers have broader responsibilities, but sometimes they're still willing to talk and give you a sense of whether you should apply again, which I think is really valuable information. And also those two agencies I mentioned, their scoring systems, usually it's like you earn points on a basis of 1 to 100 for those. And I would say pay really close attention to anywhere that you didn't earn points. They can be highly competitive. And so if you're going to apply again, I mean, by getting that first one in, you understand kind of what the funding range was, right? So if you're going to apply again, you need those 5 more points to be, get 95 points to be even considered for funding. So you really want to take anything seriously that would get you those additional points if you're going for one of those types of agencies.
I was just going to add on one other point is set expectations. So our funding rate is much higher for resubmissions. Oftentimes with that feedback, and I agree with what Sarah says, you get the feedback and just put it in the drawer and walk away for a little bit, but then use that to strengthen your application. And if you resubmit, you might have a higher likelihood of getting funded on that second time out.
Thank you so much. So with that, we are at our time for the panel. So I'd love to thank our panelists once again for your time and all of your insights and answering all of our questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Maggie.
Thanks, Alexis. Thanks, everyone. Can we give a round of applause, send some love to our panelists? Thank you for all of your knowledge that you shared. Grant writing is tough, and the 4 of you now have me all jazzed up to write a grant myself. So thank you for making this topic so exciting and teasing it apart for all of us. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to wrap us up. talk about some of the next steps for the workshop. So just a couple more slides, folks. I want to give a couple updates. First, that we are working on crafting everyone's support teams. So we mentioned this in the first week, but everyone is sort of going to have these individualized support teams of different folks who can help them think through some of their ideas for grants. So for those of you that did complete the pre-survey, we're using the information that you shared with us to craft your support teams. And we'll introduce you to the folks that you'll be working with within the next week or so. Some of you might have already gotten those emails. So if you haven't, be on the lookout. We'll be connecting you with some new folks. As a heads up, the people we'll be connecting you with, they're going to be two different types of folks. One is going to be a content expert. So that's the people who share the same topical interest as you. And you'll be meeting with them twice during the next few weeks. And then we'll also introduce you to your review team member. That's one of my colleagues, coworkers here at the collaboratory, who's going to be working to give you feedback on your weekly assignments. So stay on the lookout for those emails from us. And then I'm going to wrap up just really quickly, giving you a heads up about the assignment for this week. So there is an assignment this week. It's short. It's 500 words or less. My cat wants to join. I think she always gets excited when she sees a fun group of people. But for the assignment, you have two choices this week. So we know folks are coming to the table with different experiences and different things they want to learn. So you get a choice of which one you want to do this week based on what you want to get out of the last couple of sessions. The first assignment is to go through a previous grant proposal and sort of dissect it and do some reflection on the strengths and opportunities based on the things we talked about today. And then the second option, this is especially good for folks who are new to grant writing or people who are exploring public health grants for the first time. So go ahead and poke through some of the links that Robin Sylvester shared with us last week. If you want to go through the PowerPoint or the slides, they're there for you to go through, but poke around and see if you can find grants that would be a good fit for your work. So whichever one you choose, it should be relatively short. So 500 words, 1 page for your write-up. And if you go to the Google site, there's a place to submit it under weekly assignments. If we could do just one, ask you all for a favor, is if you could please put your name in the document title, because we have lots of cooks in the kitchen looking at the assignments that you submit. So if you put your name in the title of the document, then we can find it really easily. And if you can submit it, give it a week, submit it before our next session next week, then we'll aim to get you feedback within a week. So we'll turn it around pretty quickly for you. And I'm going to pause to see if folks have any questions. I think maybe some things are popping up in the chat. Okay, it's love for all of our panelists. But do folks have any questions about either of these things, either connecting with your support team or the assignment for this week before we wrap up? Okay, great. If you do have questions later, folks should have my email, so feel free to email me. And if you missed any of the resources in the chat today, we're going to download the chat and put all of these resources on the Google site. So look out for those soon too. Okay. Thank you, folks. Thanks again to our panelists and to our moderator. Thank you all for bringing your energy. And everyone have a great day.